In this video, I'd like to introduce you to the FRQ type known as the Concept Application Question, or CAQ. First, let's review. The AP Government exam consists of two parts. The first part is multiple choice, and it's in the second part where you will respond to four different types of free response questions. Depending on when in the year you are watching this video, you may or may not be familiar with all four types, but the concept application question is the first one that appears on the exam. And in many ways, it's the simplest of the four, at least in terms of what you're being asked to do. As it says here in the concept application question, you're being asked to, as the name suggests, apply government concepts, things that you have learned about how government works, to a real life or a hypothetical scenario. So it's really a question that sees if you get it, if you can take what you've learned and apply it to potential developments in our political process. Here are some of the general FRQ tips, ones that are elaborated upon in another video. If necessary, you might want to pause this video now so you can review these tips as they apply to all FRQs. All right, now let's talk more specifically about the concept application question. As I said just a minute ago, you're going to be given an authentic, meaning real, or a hypothetical scenario. Now, these are often referred to as the issue. And normally these take the form of a couple paragraphs. Sometimes it's actually an excerpt from a newspaper article, but it's something that has happened in our nation's history or could potentially happen, and you're going to be asked to apply what you know about government to that scenario. The CAQ is scored out of 3 points. It's the only one that is scored out of 3. The others are scored out of either 4 or 6. And it is broken down into an A, B, and C, with each part worth 1 point. Pretty simple. My advice is that you do not read the scenario, the passage, the stimulus, whatever you want to call it. Do not read that first. Read the questions, A, B, and C first, so you can see what it is that you're looking for in the scenario. Then, and only then, read the scenario. Now, as you read, obviously you're looking for, answers or what you might say to answer each part of the question. But I think more importantly, as you read the scenario, you want to ask yourself, what is the one specific issue in this passage? Like, what is this passage really all about? Try to pull out that one rather specific thing that this article or these paragraphs are talking about. Now, it may not be obvious. It may not use the actual term for it. It may also be clouded in some extra information. And that is why I think this is so important. It is very easy for a student to get distracted from the main point when they read these passages. I think the sample that I'm going to share with you has a good example of that. So when you read the scenario, try to hone in on that one thing. What is this, assuming it's an article from a newspaper, what is it really trying to say? Can you condense that down into maybe just one sentence? And then write it down. Make notes of that for yourself, because you will be referencing back to that throughout your response, and you don't want to lose sight of it. Now, many of these will, in the questions, use the phrase in the context of the scenario or referencing the scenario. When you see that, what they're telling you is you need to relate what you know, your knowledge of government, to the specific scenario or the specific issue that is in this stimulus, in the prompt. So you don't want to talk about government abstractly, generically. You don't want to just say, hey, here's what I know about how government works. You want to take that and apply it to the circumstances in this again, scenario or passage. You want to show that you can relate what you know about government to a very specific instance. Again, I think my sample will give you a better sense of that. But a lot of students have missed points simply because they failed to relate it to the scenario. They demonstrated that they understood the government concept, but they did it in such a way that they didn't connect it back to the scenario. And that is a very frustrating way to lose this point. That is actually all I have to tell you about the concept application question. There's not much to it. It's, as I like to say often, a very straightforward question, FRQ. The questions are very direct. You're going to answer them. They can take all different forms. One thing about the concept application question is really anything we learn in government could apply. So whereas other FRQs seem to lend themselves to certain material, obviously SCOTUS comparison, it's going to be about the knowledge of the 15 must-know court cases. Concept application can be about anything. So there are really no specific guidelines to give you other than what I've already shared with you in this video. So now let's look at a sample concept application question to see what I'm talking about. So here right now you see the passage, but if you paid attention, I told you, do not read this first. Ignore this for a minute. Let's skip past it and look at the questions themselves. So you'll see that in part A, it asks you to identify and describe the feature of the Electoral College system that causes the issue outlined in the scenario. So recall, you need to figure out what that issue is. What's the problem here? What's the issue that this passage is telling us about? And we want to hone in on what exactly that is. Then and only then can you identify and describe a feature of the Electoral College that causes it. Right? I also, before we leave part A, I want to point out something else. Now here it says identify and describe. Originally, this question just said describe the feature of the Electoral College system that causes the issue in the scenario. I don't know, once you see what it is, I don't know how you could write that without identifying the feature first. It's kind of, when it said describe, it implies, identify it, name it. What is this feature called? And then describe it. In essence, define it. Both are important, right? That you do both. So I'll give it to you now. The feature that is clearly going to be what they're talking about is the winner-take-all feature, the winner-take-all aspect of how electoral votes are awarded. You should name it. You should identify it, the winner-take-all feature, but you also have to describe it. What does that mean? Part B, then, explain how the Electoral College system could be changed to remedy this issue. All right. So again, once we read the passage, you'll see what the issue is, and then you have to come up with a practical change to the Electoral College system that would actually fix this issue. And then here's that line, in the context of the scenario. So what they're reminding you is, don't just answer this question generically, relate it back to the scenario. In the context of the scenario, explain how the Electoral College system, as it is now, can affect individual political behavior. Now, I'm glad I'm sharing this sample question with you, because as I've used this one before with students, or I've used some of these words with students, I've seen a lot of common mistakes. This phrase, individual political behavior, is probably never going to appear on a blue sheet. It's not going to be in Quizlet. It may never appear in the textbook. But yet, it's assumed that you know what that means. So think about it. We're talking about a behavior, something someone does, of a political nature, And it's done by an individual, not by a group, not by an institution, not by government itself, but an individual person. Now, I hope you realize that the most basic individual political behavior is voting, but there are others. So this question is asking, in the context scenario, explain how the electoral college system might affect someone's individual political behavior. And again, the simplest thing would be, how might it affect the way in which someone votes or whether or not they do vote? That's kind of what this is getting at. So now let's take a look at the scenario. And remember, there's a lot of information in here. There's you can quickly see there's some numbers in here, some data. But what we're trying to figure out is, what's the one specific issue that this scenario is giving us? So I'll read it and then kind of explain it to you. It says, data from the 2016 presidential campaign indicate that 53% of campaign events for the two major parties' presidential and vice presidential candidates in the 2 months before the November election were in only 4 states: Florida, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Ohio. Now, hopefully, you already see where this is going. In a presidential campaign, the major party candidates primarily visited just a few states. Now, the next sentence builds on that. During that same time, 87% of campaign visits by those same 4 candidates were in just 12 states. And none of the 4 candidates ever went to 27 states. So more than half. The majority of states were completely ignored by the candidates. Now it adds, even in the swing states where they do campaign, the candidates focus on urban areas where most voters live. In Pennsylvania, for example, 72% of the visits were in the Philadelphia and Pittsburgh areas, the 2 big cities. Now, I would say that last part is unnecessary, talking about the urban areas. It may reinforce what's being said, but I can see that also as being a distraction. Hopefully you recognize that the primary issue is that the Electoral College system causes candidates to really focus on just a handful of swing states and ignore many others. Okay, we probably have talked about that in class. You should know that. This passage from time.com just gives a little more specificity to that, but that's the main idea. The Electoral College kind of compels candidates to focus only on a few swing states. That's the issue. And that is something you would want to write down in your notes, like your notes as you're preparing to write this. You don't want to lose sight of that issue, because notice part A and B both talk about the issue outlined in the scenario. So once you figure out what that is, note it, because you're going to keep referencing it. Now, let's get back to the questions. A says, what feature of the Electoral College system causes this issue? And hopefully you understand this and see this. This has challenged students before. As much time as we spend talking about the Electoral College system, students still struggle with it. It is winner take all. It's the one and only answer to part A. Winner take all is what causes this issue. Because these swing states are all or nothing, you're either going to win all the electoral votes or your opponent is going to win all these electoral votes. And because in these handful of swing states, it's going to be close. That's why the candidates keep going there. That's why they keep campaigning there. In the safe states, the ones that almost always go to one party or the other, and no one expects them to even be close, they don't have to visit because they already know they're guaranteed to either win that state and all of its electoral votes or lose that state. And so what's the point, right? So it is clearly the winner-take-all feature of the Electoral College that causes this issue. So in Part A, you simply need to identify it, call it winner-take-all, and then describe how that works. Now in Part B, explain how the Electoral College system could be changed to remedy the issue. So how do we fix this? How do we get candidates to maybe campaign in more states? Now, as I've used this FRQ in the past, I've had students come up with some rather outlandish solutions, bordering on unconstitutional, or just like kind of bizarre scenarios. I hate to mock those answers, but I just want to point out that sometimes you overthink it. For example, I remember maybe more than one student saying like, well, we could pass a law that forces candidates to campaign in every state. Like, really? Like, would that be a law? Like, how can you do that? Um, you know, we can make all states' electoral votes worth the same. I've heard that, and I'm like, well, I don't know that that would actually fix the problem. They'd all be worth the same, but you're still going to campaign only in the ones that are close, that are swing states. When you're not addressing winner take all. The answers are evident. Obviously, not every state, most, but not every state uses winner take all. Maine and Nebraska use the district method. That could be a remedy if candidates are not competing winner take all, but district by district for each electoral vote. Well, then they're likely to visit more states because they want to win the districts in those states. Or, as people have proposed, just get rid of the Electoral College altogether, do a national popular vote, and then you have no such thing as swing states and no such thing as winner take all. Those are two answers that are out there, and one of those should be the response to be. But the key here to earn this point, it says explain how. So you've got to show how the district method or how a national popular vote would remedy the issue. How would it get rid of the problem that candidates focus on a handful of states only? I often use the phrase connect the dots, connect it back. You need to really flesh out what this question's asking you to do. And that is why I say that you can almost never earn a point on an FRQ in one sentence. Several well-developed but short, simple sentences will get that job done. And especially if it says explain. You can't explain something in one sentence. Finally, in part C, in the context of the scenario, explain how the Electoral College system can affect individual political behavior. So again, thinking about the scenario, thinking about this notion of swing states versus safe states. What might that do? What might winner take all do to an individual's political behavior? And again, the most basic political behavior is voting. So here you probably want to talk about something like, well, if I'm in one of these battleground or swing states where the candidates keep coming, that might make me more attentive to the election and thus more likely to vote. If I'm not in one of those states, if I'm in one of those 27 states that candidates didn't visit, I may lose interest in the election and not vote. Or winner take all, if I'm in a safe state and I know that all of the electoral votes are going to one candidate or the other, if I'm in a safe state where polls show, the Democrat's going to win 65% of the vote, this isn't even close, then I may be less inclined to vote because I'm not going to change that outcome. My one vote isn't going to give them any more electoral votes, so why bother, right? But again, connecting it back to that individual political behavior, in this case, voting. Now, I will share this sample with you, but I'll show you here very quickly. Notice that in each part, several sentences, bordering on a paragraph, is required to earn the point. It's never a very simple answer and concept application. You're showing that you have a good grasp of government and how it works. I hope this video was helpful, and I hope you find concept application questions to be fairly easy because they are just getting at your basic knowledge of government. So good luck.